It was one of those evenings at Hogwarts when the air itself seemed to shimmer with quiet magic. The last blush of twilight faded over the distant hills, leaving the castle bathed in golden candlelight. The lanterns lining the corridors glowed softly, casting gentle reflections on the stone floors, and the portraits on the walls whispered their usual bedtime gossip in hushed, sleepy tones. Outside, the Quidditch pitch lay under a faint mist, its tall goalposts fading into the soft, silvery fog. Inside the Gryffindor common room, the fire crackled lazily. Shadows flickered across the room as students chatted in low voices or finished last-minute homework. The warmth of the hearth and the faint scent of parchment filled the air, creating a calm and familiar comfort that only Hogwarts could hold. This was where our story began, with Ron Weasley slouched in one of the old armchairs near the fire, rubbing his eyes and trying to recall something that hovered just beyond memory's reach. There was a faint crease on his forehead, not from worry but from confusion. He had this strange feeling that something important had happened earlier that day, and yet he couldn't remember what. He glanced around the room, watching as Hermione scribbled something quickly across her parchment, her quill scratching softly. Harry, meanwhile, sat across from her, absently spinning his wand between his fingers. Everything felt normal, calm, peaceful. But somewhere beneath the surface, something about the day didn't quite fit. The smell of the firewood, the hum of conversation, the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. Everything carried the rhythm of routine, and yet, every so often, Ron found himself pausing, as though waiting for something to click back into place in his mind. Outside the window, the wind brushed against the glass, carrying with it a faint echo, a sound that almost resembled a cheer. Ron blinked, glancing out toward the Quidditch pitch. The stands were empty now, ghostly shapes in the moonlight. But for just a moment, he could have sworn he saw movement, a flash of crimson, a shimmer of gold, like a memory half remembered. He frowned slightly. "Strange," he muttered to himself. Little did he know that faint flicker of recollection, that ghost of a sound, was the first ripple of a mystery buried deep within the castle's enchanted heart. A forgotten match, a cheering crowd that no one remembered, and a question that lingered quietly in the night air. What happens when magic itself forgets? So, dear listener, make yourself comfortable. Let the warmth of the fire and the calm rhythm of Hogwarts' heart carry you into the story. Because tonight, we'll follow Ron Weasley into one of Hogwarts' gentlest, strangest secrets, and the mystery of the missing Quidditch match that nobody remembered playing. And, before we begin, if this tale brings you peace or wonder, don't forget to like this story, subscribe, and join me again for more nights of Hogwarts magic, where dreams and memory intertwine under candlelight now. Let's step quietly into the evening where the mystery first began. The fire in the Gryffindor common room burned low, painting soft orange patterns on the walls as the evening deepened. The room carried that unmistakable end-of-day calm. Laughter fading, pages turning, and the occasional sigh of someone finishing their homework. In the center of it all sat three familiar figures: Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley. Ron had kicked off his shoes hours ago, one leg draped lazily over the arm of his chair. His red hair glowed faintly in the firelight as he tossed a chocolate frog card from one hand to the other, his expression distant. He wasn't worried, not exactly, but his mind was turning circles around something he couldn't name. It was rare for Ron to sit still this long, especially when there wasn't food or Quidditch involved. "Ron, are you even listening?" Hermione asked, gently, not lifting her eyes from the scroll she was reviewing. Her voice carried its usual warmth, the calm, patient tone that always softened her sharper edges. Ron blinked and looked over.
Huh? Oh, yeah, of course. Something about
Ancient runes? Harry snorted, leaning back with a grin. Hermione's been done with ancient runes for an hour? You've been staring at that card since dinner. Hermione's lips curved into a small smile, though her quill didn't stop moving. Honestly, Ron, you've been somewhere else all evening. What's going on? Ron hesitated, glancing toward the window again. The night beyond was perfectly still. Too still, perhaps. I don't know, he said slowly. It's weird. I keep thinking. Wasn't there supposed to be a Quidditch match today? Harry frowned, exchanging a look with Hermione. No, mate. That's tomorrow. Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. You've been talking about it all week. Ron nodded uncertainly, though the crease between his brows didn't disappear. Yeah, right. Tomorrow. But even as he said it, the words felt wrong, as though they belonged to someone else's memory. Hermione set her quill down and finally looked at him. You must be overtired. You were up late last night finishing your charms essay. Ron gave a faint, tired grin. You mean copying yours? Hermione's eyes softened in mock exasperation. Precisely. They all laughed quietly, and for a moment, the unease faded. The three of them, their friendship, their rhythm. It was something even the castle itself seemed to hum along with. It was a warmth older than words, threaded into every shared glance, every teasing remark, every quiet night like this one. Crookshanks stretched near the fire, his fur glowing coppery in the flickering light. The portrait of the fat lady yawned sleepily in her frame. Everything about Hogwarts at that hour felt timeless. A living lullaby of old wood, flickering candles and soft echoes of laughter. Still, as the flames crackled and the clock chimed quietly in the corner, Ron couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something he should remember, and just as he leaned back, letting his eyes close, the faintest echo drifted through the air. A distant cheer, fading as soon as it came. No one else seemed to hear it. Only Ron. And in that small, almost unnoticeable moment, the story of the missing Quidditch match began to whisper itself awake. The night deepened around the castle like a velvet cloak, soft and sheltering. Down in the common room, the last embers had settled into a sleepy glow, and upstairs, the dormitory windows silvered with frost. Somewhere in the distance, an old clock chimed, the notes round and gentle, as if reminding the corridors to breathe and the staircases to rest. Ron drifted in and out of dreams, wind in his ears, the clean, bright smell of sky, the steady weight of a broom in his hands. He heard an echoing cheer ripple across a wide space, felt it pass through him like warm sunlight, and then the sound softened, turned to a hush, and thinned away like mist. He woke in the dim half-light before dawn, the kind of hour that belongs to owls and secrets. For a long moment he just lay there, listening to the soft breathing of the boys around him and the winter wind stroking the window. Everything was as it should be, and yet he lifted his hand and brushed his thumb across his palm. There was a dusting of fine grit. Ron sat up, heart quiet but curious, and rubbed his fingers together. Sand? No, not quite. The texture was earthy, faintly green-scented. Pitch dust. The smell rose, maddeningly familiar. Cut grass, rain-damp wood, a whisper of broom polish. He frowned, turned his wrist, and saw a thin smudge along his knuckles as if a glove had pressed there. He hadn't been to the pitch yesterday. He was sure of it. He would have remembered the tug of wind and the thrum of the stands. He would have remembered the way sound becomes a wide blanket in the air, how the world narrows to the flight ahead and then widens again as a team comes down laughing. He would have remembered the taste of cold air and the grin you wear, even when you're too tired for grinning. Still that grit. He slid out of bed without waking anyone and padded to the window. The glass was cold against his forehead. Below, the Quidditch pitch lay in that soft grey that comes just before dawn. Snow skimmed its edges, but the centre, a broad oval of dark grass, looked faintly brushed, as if many feet had passed over it. He should have felt silly for noticing. Instead, he felt calm, purposeful. Something quiet was calling him to look. By breakfast, the castle had filled with the gentle sounds of morning, spoons chiming against bowls, owls lowing softly as they circled the rafters. A low tide of conversation that rose and fell with the steam from the porridge. Harry found Ron studying his hands again. "You all right?" Harry asked, pushing a plate of toast closer. "Fine," Ron said, sounding as if he were listening to a voice from another room. "Did you ever wake up with grass on your hands when you didn't,
go outside?"
Harry blinked once. "Not usually." Hermione arrived with a stack of post and slid onto the bench opposite, her scarf still tucked neatly at her throat. "Morning," she said, voice warm as the tea she poured. "You both look like you've been having very serious thoughts about toast." Ron told her about the grit, the scent, the faint wind-stung feeling along his cheekbones. Hermione listened with that calm attention she gave to pages in a book she loved. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss it. She only said, "Let's notice everything today. If something wants to be remembered, it will leave a trail." They decided to walk the long way to Charms. The corridors had the golden hush of a lessonless morning, and the winter light through the stained glass turned the floors to a patchwork of soft colours. They passed the notice board outside the common room, where club announcements fluttered. Hermione paused. "Look," she murmured. A rectangle of bare cork, precisely outlined by tiny pinholes, sat in the centre of the board, empty. Paper had been there recently. The cork was lighter than the rest, as if shielded from the sun. Ron leaned closer. The pattern of holes formed neat corners and a centered line of 2 pins that would have held a ribbon. A match announcement often had a ribbon. He could see it so clearly that for a second he saw it. Scarlet and gold striping, a tidy bow. He reached out, but Hermione stopped him with a gentle touch.
"Let's keep it as it is," she whispered.
"Sometimes you see better when you don't touch." On the first landing, the portrait stirred. A lady in a velvet gown leaned forward and peered kindly.
"Oh, it was so spirited," she murmured, then blinked as though waking. "Pardon, what was I saying?"
"Spirited?" Ron asked. "What was spirited?" But the lady smiled vaguely and smoothed her skirts. "What a bright morning," she said, and turned to speak to a neighbour whose frame housed a sleeping terrier. Outside Flitwick's classroom, a cluster of Ravenclaws discussed something in low voices, their hands making small, excited motions, swoops and arcs. As Ron, Harry, and Hermione approached, the Ravenclaws fell quiet and glanced at one another with puzzled little smiles. The quiet was not unfriendly. It felt like when you wake from a marvelous dream that vanishes as you reach for it, leaving only a warm glow. They filed into Charms. The air smelled of lemon polish and chalk. Professor Flitwick, bright as a bird on a branch, seemed particularly buoyant. "Excellent energy today," he said in his light, cheerful way. "Very team-spirited." Ron, Hermione, and Harry shared a look. After Charms, they took the corridor that passes the trophy room, because if anything knows how to keep a secret at Hogwarts, it's a cabinet full of gleaming silver. Dust motes floated in the slanted light, slow as snowflakes. Ron traced the edge of a Quidditch cup with his eyes. Hermione tilted her head. "Do you smell that?" Harry nodded. "Rousseau? Fresh polish?" Hermione said softly. She pointed to a small brass plate where an invisible cloth had missed the tiniest crescent near the screw. "Filch would never leave a mark like that if he remembered polishing it this morning." "Maybe he forgot," Ron said, but the words had no conviction. He could see, as if through glass, a blurred reflection of a scarf lifted high, a pattern of scarlet and gold, a hand thumping a shoulder with joy. He could not say where the images came from. They had the texture of memory, but none of its anchors. They tried the library next, because when the castle whispers, the library often hums in reply. Madame Pince smiled at Hermione with unusual softness and waved them toward the periodicals rack. Hermione scanned the latest Hogwarts Herald. No match summary, no notice of postponement. But when she flipped to the second page, A faint square of darker ink showed through from the backside, as if something had been printed then
Unprinted.
Ron didn't know magic could do that. He wondered if the castle had turned a page while they weren't looking. Back in the corridor, the Marauder's map came out. Harry tapped it with his wand, and the pale web of rooms and corridors unfurled like a heartbeat. Tiny labeled dots moved in their busy daily ways. Ron expected the pitch to be empty. It wasn't, or rather, it was and wasn't. The oval was a clean, blank lake of parchment, but around it marched a slow ring of dots with no names. Just little circles, as if the map remembered positions without identifying the people who had held them. "That's not how it usually looks," Harry said softly, as if not to startle what he saw. "Spectators have names." Hermione traced the ring without touching the parchment. "What if it's not a crowd?"
What if it's...
The shape of a crowd? The memory of where feet would have been. The words wrapped Ron in a hush that wasn't fear. He felt the pitch at his back, the steady hold of a broom with calloused hands. He remembered, or maybe imagined, the way a save feels in the chest, a quiet thump of success that hardly anyone hears. He closed his eyes. "If there was a match," he said gently, "who won?" No one knew. They decided to take the long path down to the pitch after lunch, moving at a pace that matched the winter sun. The stairs turned obligingly. The doors sighed softly as if pleased to open. Outside, the day wore its light like fine silk. The three cut across the lawn where the snow lay thin and squeaked faintly beneath their shoes. The stands rose ahead, all silvery ribs and empty seats. The pitch itself was unmarked by lines of paint, but the grass bore the whispery look of many feet having pressed and released it. "Look at the goalmouth," Hermione said, voice barely above the soft wind. "The turf there is slightly darker." Ron stood beneath the tall ring and tilted his face up. The sky was clean and pale. He reached to the rim and felt nothing unusual. And yet, he could have sworn some small echo reached back through his fingertips. A vibration, like a chord, thrummed long ago. They stood very still. Far off, a rook called once, and then the air went quiet again, as if honoring whatever the pitch wanted to say. Harry pointed toward the Gryffindor stand. "There," he said. On one of the lower benches, a woolen thread lay like a strand of sunlight, a scarlet thread, very fine. Hermione lifted it carefully. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and winter wool. On the plank beside it, a circle of dust where a button might have rested, the faintest sugar grit, as if a sugared pastry had been set there for a moment, then lifted. Ron's chest warmed with an affection so sudden and soft it made him laugh under his breath. "Lavender scones," he said, surprised at himself. He didn't know why he knew that, but the knowing came with a picture of a mittened hand passing a paper bag along a row of knees. They settled in that same row, because sometimes you catch a memory by sitting where it prefers to sit. The wood held the day's cold kindly. The wind pressed their scarves to their throats, not sharply, but like the push of a friend guiding you gently. Hermione closed her eyes. "If no one remembers, it isn't because it didn't happen," she murmured. "It might be because the castle put the moment somewhere safe." "Some matches matter differently," Harry smiled sideways at her.
You think the pitch would keep a secret?
She opened her eyes and returned the smile. "If it was asked nicely." Ron brushed his palm again and this time didn't fight the feeling that rose to meet him. A clean flex of muscle, a sure lean left, a glove closing around a quaffle with a soft thock that no one but a keeper loves.
He couldn't grasp the score.
He didn't need it. There was only the sense of a thing done rightly, graciously, and the wave of sound that follows, not a roar, but a wide, low ah that settles the shoulders and warms the lungs. They walked a slow circle around the pitch. Then,
as if tracing the ring on the map,
here and there the grass offered a whisper, The imprint of a heel near the aisle, a scuff where someone had shifted from foot to foot during a tense patch of sky. By the exit, a sliver of parchment lay caught in a seam of wood. Hermione teased it free. A corner-only scarlet border, a bit of gold ink, the looped tail of a letter that could have been G or R. "Program," Ron said softly. He hadn't bought one. He remembered thinking he'd read someone else's afterward.
When had he had that thought?
They carried the corner back to the castle like an autumn leaf. On the way, nearly headless Nick floated from a wall with his courtly half-bow. "Good spirits, dear hearts?" he enthused, as if congratulating them on something. Then, with a flustered blink, "What are we all so pleased about?" His expression clouded with gentle puzzlement, the kind that a ghost wears when the living world has moved a page without telling him. "No matter," he said kindly. "You look well rested. That's the finest kind of victory." Hermione tucked the parchment into her pocket, as though it were a pressed flower. "Thank you, Sir Nicholas." In the afternoon hush, they tried one more place, the small alcove near McGonagall's office, where the house hourglasses marked points with patient light. The rubies in Gryffindor's glass had not changed since morning, but Ron noticed something else on the stone shelf beneath the glass, a crescent of red dust, fine as blush, the exact arc a sleeve might leave when someone leaned close to watch. He pictured Professor McGonagall,
Hands folded, watching points trickle after a match.
only to find there were no points to award for something the castle had hidden. He hoped that if she had thought it odd, she had also thought it kind. Some things want to be between a team and the air they fly through. By evening, the day's questions had knitted themselves into a gentler form. The three sat again by the common room fire.
Nothing demanded to be solved.
The mystery did not crowd them. It lay like a warm shawl around the shoulders, felt, not argued with. Hermione drew the map from her satchel once more, not to interrogate it, but to sit with it. The oval of the pitch was still. The ring of nameless dots had faded to a faint suggestion, like a watermark. She smoothed the parchment with her palm and said very softly, "Thank you." Harry leaned his head back against the couch. If there was a match, I think it ended kindly. Ron smiled at the fire. "I think so too." The embers exhaled a little gust of golden sparks as if agreeing. Above the mantel, the clock ticked on in its calm way. The hands moved neither quickly nor slow, simply right. Outside, a breeze moved the snow from one windowsill to another with the tenderness of someone tucking in a blanket. In the quiet, small conformations gathered like feathers, a thread, a grit, a crescent of polish, the hush in a ghost's voice, the map's shy ring. No one in the castle announced anything. No notice appeared. No score was remembered. And yet, in the space where a story would have been, something was. The day held it lightly, the way you cup your hands around a moth and feel the whisper of its wings without needing to see its color as the last students drifted up the stairs and the common room yawned into its nighttime calm. Ron felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He didn't know if he had played, or how he had played, or whether the cheer he'd felt was for him. He only knew the steady, settled feeling that follows when a moment has been exactly what it needed to be. He looked at his hands. The grip was gone. The scent of pitch had faded to the memory of a memory. He flexed his fingers and felt, very softly, the echo of a catch. "Tomorrow?" Hermione said, gathering her parchment. "We'll see if the pitch says anything new." "Tomorrow," Harry echoed.
Standing and stretching, yeah, Ron said.
Content in a way that required no answers at all. Tomorrow. The fire sank, the room sighed, and the castle, pleased with its secret, closed the day like a book whose quiet chapter had been read from beginning to end under a blanket of winter light. Morning unfurled like a pale ribbon across the sky, and Hogwarts woke with its usual comforting murmur. The castle smelled faintly of toast and ink. The corridors wore their soft polish of footfalls and laughter. Yet beneath the familiar rhythms, Ron sensed a quieter rhythm, like a second heartbeat, gentle and old, keeping time with something the day hadn't said out loud. At breakfast, he found himself studying the Great Hall as if it were a page he'd read many times, but never truly seen. The enchanted ceiling showed a calm winter blue. A few shy clouds drifted like feathers. The tables gleamed, and the floating candles swayed with tiny, breath-like motions. Ron felt peaceful and inquisitive in the unhurried way you feel when you already know the answer will be kind. Hermione arrived with a satchel and a smile that carried both focus and fondness. Harry waved them to their usual spot, already pouring tea with the easy economy of long friendship. For a while, they ate in the hopeful quiet of a morning that doesn't ask anything strenuous of you. Then Hermione said, almost absently, "I wonder, if the castle can hide a match, can it also place a memory back where it belongs?" Ron considered, stirring his porridge.
A soft fragment brushed his mind, scarlet moving through air, the thud of a glove, a wide, warm cheer that wasn't quite sound.
"What do you mean to place it back?" Hermione's eyes brightened in that tender way they do when an idea arrives like a bird to a windowsill. Not like rewinding time, more like letting the echo become audible again. The memory might be kept safe somewhere.
A conservatory of moments, Harry smiled.
And we visit like very quiet tourists. That would be nice, Ron said, and meant it. They planned nothing elaborate, only a slow day with space in it. After Transfiguration, they walked the long corridor that overlooks the grounds, the one with the tall windows that frame the pitch, as if it were a painting hung for the sky to admire. Snow clung to the stands, delicately scalloped. The oval of grass wore a faint sheen like breath on glass. Ron leaned his shoulder against the stone and let his eyes soften, the way you do when you want to see stars at the edge of evening. He did not hunt the memory, he offered it a place to land. He thought of the words Hermione had used, a conservatory of moments, and pictured a room inside the castle where sunlight and old magic kept fragile things alive. That thought must have been a kind of invitation, because the light around them changed. Not abruptly, never abruptly, but with that subtle, underwater shift the castle favored when it meant to be gentle. The corridor brightened without glare. The air hummed low, a kindly sound you might feel through your ribs more than hear. The window panes kept their winter chill, yet a hush, like early summer, drifted through the stone. Harry stilled. Hermione's hand went to the glass with the care of a curator approaching a rare page. "Do you feel—" "Yes," Ron said, smiling without knowing why. The window didn't become a screen. It simply grew transparent in a new way, as though two layers of Hogwarts, the present laid over the kept, were learning how to greet each other through a handshake of light. The snowy stands remained. The winter sky held its calm. Yet across that same view, a second scene blossomed lightly, as if lifted by breath. Banners, ribbon shouts of scarlet and gold, a ribbon of blue drifting in good-natured rivalry. Students in knitted hats and glowing scarves. The pitch, a brighter, greener oval wearing the shine of a day that meant well. A cheer braided itself through the corridor, like a ribbon that remembered it had been sound. Hermione let out a little exhale. Harry's mouth tilted in quiet wonder.
Ron felt the simple, anchored joy that belongs to a body doing the thing it understands.
The vision had no hard edges, and it asked nothing of them. It was not a film. It was the quality of presence itself. A Saturday that rose, a breeze that helped, gloves fitting the hands that needed them, a team held by the wide, soft bowl of the stands. They didn't see faces in detail, only the kinds of gestures that make a day feel whole. A pair of mittened hands sharing a paper bag down the row. a scarf stretched like a banner between friends, a Ravenclaw hat, blue with a tiny stitched eagle, nodding in appreciation at a tidy block from a Gryffindor chaser. The sort of exchange that says, "Well done," without turning praise into noise. Ron leaned closer, and in that moment the vision gently obliged, as if it knew who had asked. The keeper on the Gryffindor end cut left, sure and balanced, shoulders square. You don't often see yourself from outside, but Ron recognized the motion the way you recognize your handwriting in a pile of parchment. The keeper's hands rose, not dramatically, just right. The quaffle softened into those gloves with the faint, beloved thock you feel in your wrists and remember in your heart. Ron laughed. One quiet, bright note. He didn't claim it aloud. The castle would have heard him if he had needed to. But contentment wore him like a scarf. Morning unfurled like a pale ribbon across the sky, and Hogwarts woke with its usual comforting murmur. The castle smelled faintly of toast and ink. The corridors wore their soft polish of footfalls and laughter. Yet beneath the familiar rhythms, Ron sensed a quieter rhythm, like a second heartbeat, gentle and old, keeping time with something the day hadn't said out loud. At breakfast, he found himself studying the Great Hall as if it were a page he'd read many times, but never truly seen. The enchanted ceiling showed a calm winter blue. A few shy clouds drifted like feathers. The tables gleamed, and the floating candles swayed with tiny, breath-like motions. Ron felt peaceful, and inquisitive in the unhurried way you feel when you already know the answer will be kind. Hermione arrived with a satchel and a smile that carried both focus and fondness. Harry waved them to their usual spot, already pouring tea with the easy economy of long friendship. For a while, they ate in the hopeful quiet of a morning that doesn't ask anything strenuous of you. Then Hermione said, almost absently, "I wonder, if the castle can hide a match, can it also place a memory back where it belongs?" Ron considered, stirring his porridge.
A soft fragment brushed his mind, scarlet moving through air, the thud of a glove, a wide, warm cheer that wasn't quite sound.
"What do you mean to place it back?" Hermione's eyes brightened in that tender way they do when an idea arrives like a bird to a windowsill. Not like rewinding time, more like letting the echo become audible again. The memory might be kept safe somewhere.
A conservatory of moments, Harry smiled.
And we visit like very quiet tourists. That would be nice, Ron said, and meant it. They planned nothing elaborate, only a slow day with space in it. After Transfiguration, they walked the long corridor that overlooks the grounds, the one with the tall windows that frame the pitch, as if it were a painting hung for the sky to admire. Snow clung to the stands, delicately scalloped. The oval of grass wore a faint sheen like breath on glass. Ron leaned his shoulder against the stone and let his eyes soften, the way you do when you want to see stars at the edge of evening. He did not hunt the memory, he offered it a place to land. He thought of the words Hermione had used, a conservatory of moments, and pictured a room inside the castle where sunlight and old magic kept fragile things alive. That thought must have been a kind of invitation, because the light around them changed. Not abruptly, never abruptly, but with that subtle, underwater shift the castle favored when it meant to be gentle. The corridor brightened without glare. The air hummed low, a kindly sound you might feel through your ribs more than hear. The window panes kept their winter chill, yet a hush, like early summer, drifted through the stone. Harry stilled. Hermione's hand went to the glass with the care of a curator approaching a rare page. "Do you feel—" "Yes," Ron said, smiling without knowing why. The window didn't become a screen. It simply grew transparent in a new way, as though two layers of Hogwarts, the present laid over the kept, were learning how to greet each other through a handshake of light. The snowy stands remained. The winter sky held its calm. Yet across that same view, a second scene blossomed lightly, as if lifted by breath. Banners, ribbon shouts of scarlet and gold, a ribbon of blue drifting in good-natured rivalry.
Students in knitted hats and glowing scarves.
The pitch, a brighter, greener oval wearing the shine of a day that meant well. A cheer braided itself through the corridor like a ribbon that remembered it had been sound. Hermione let out a little exhale. Harry's mouth tilted in quiet wonder.
Ron felt the simple, anchored joy that belongs to a body doing the thing it understands.
The vision had no hard edges and it asked nothing of them. It was not a film. It was the quality of presence itself. A Saturday that rose, a breeze that helped, gloves fitting the hands that needed them, a team held by the wide, soft bowl of the stands. They didn't see faces in detail, only the kinds of gestures that make a day feel whole. A pair of mittened hands sharing a paper bag down the row, a scarf stretched like a banner between friends, a Ravenclaw hat, blue with a tiny stitched eagle, nodding in appreciation at a tidy block from a Gryffindor chaser. The sort of exchange that says, "Well done," without turning praise into noise. Ron leaned closer, and in that moment the vision gently obliged, as if it knew who had asked. The keeper on the Gryffindor end cut left, sure and balanced, shoulders square. You don't often see yourself from outside, but Ron recognized the motion the way you recognize your handwriting in a pile of parchment. The keeper's hands rose, not dramatically, just right. The quaffle softened into those gloves with the faint, beloved thock you feel in your wrists and remember in your heart. Ron laughed. One quiet, bright note. He didn't claim it aloud. The castle would have heard him if he had needed to. But contentment wore him like a scarf. Near the center stood a short stand with 3 empty pedestals, each edged in brass. The brass was warm and slightly worn where fingertips might have rested.
A small card in a frame sat before them.
The script upon it was narrow and neat. Borrow gently, return gently. Take in the manner you hope to be taken.
Leave the room kinder than you found it. No sooner had they read than a hush, like the pause between 2 chords, settled across their shoulders.
Hermione looked at Ron. "Would you like to try?" "Borrow?" Ron asked, surprised by the very idea. "Not to keep," she said. "To wear, for a look. The way you wear a shawl to remember a kind evening." Ron felt, unreasonably, and entirely, as if the room had smiled at him. He glanced about, then found himself back at the globe with the winter sunlight color, the one whose rune, red, of gloves and softness. He didn't lift it. He inclined his head and said, quietly and truly, "May I?" The globe brightened the slightest degree. Hermione reached, then paused. It wants to be held by the person who asked. Ron's palm warmed when the glass touched it, but the warmth was not heat. It was temperament, and it fitted his hand perfectly. The globe weighed very little. It felt as if it might float, a soap bubble made of memory and good manners. He held it over one of the brass-rimmed pedestals, and the glass, without leaving his hand, loosed a breath of light like pollen. It drifted up and down in a lazy loop and settled around them all. Ron shut his eyes. The room offered him, not an image, an arrangement, the exact angle of wrists that know how to cradle a ball and return it with more kindness than force. The way a breath comes out after a save, not a shout, not a grunt, but a quiet, shared yes that belongs to the body and the moment. The sense that you keep your courage supple by using it for others, not only for yourself. When he opened his eyes, Hermione's lashes were glossy, although she wasn't crying. Harry's shoulders had dropped half an inch in that precise way a person relaxes when recognition arrives. The room dimmed again, satisfied with itself. Ron placed the globe back into its cradle. He did not want more. He wanted to carry less, better. Harry drifted to a blue-silver globe with a rune ring that read, "These two learn to turn without bumping." He laughed very quietly, and light like morning on frost touched his collar. Hermione chose nothing, or rather, the room chose her and sent a petal of gold from a nearby globe that read, Explaining becomes inviting and stops being proof. It brushed her sleeve and disappeared, and she smiled with her whole expression, as if the world had grown a degree safer to speak in. When they had borrowed just enough to feel that more would be greedy, they bowed because bowing felt right, and the room bowed back with a warm pulse in the floor. Harry opened the door. They stepped into the corridor's honeyed rectangles once more. The door closed and the wood looked just like wood again. They didn't rush to tell anyone. The castle did not want it told that way. They walked, and every step seemed to pack a little kindness into the grout between stones. A suit of armor attempted a graceful half salute and nearly overbalanced. Ron steadied it with a palm and a grin, and the armor whispered, "Cheers," in a voice like a coin. By afternoon, the winter sun made a small, generous promise on the western windows, and Hermione suggested one last visit. The pitch. From the ground this time, with no peering and no asking, only thanking. They took the long route on purpose. The lawn made that faint, squeaky winter sound that says you're here. The stands held their hush. The rings stood like open circles drawn in the air by a thoughtful hand. At midfield, they stopped. No ceremony, no wands, only the kind of silence that leaves room for gratitude. Ron took off his glove and pressed his bare hand to the ground, cool, resilient, alive. Harry bowed his head. Hermione closed her eyes and breathed once, long and even, as if to say, "We understand what you did."
And we will carry it. Something rose through their palms and shoes and breath.
Not a shock or a shiver.
A steadiness.
The earth saying yes. The pitch did not speak, but if it had, it would have sounded like an elder telling you, "We kept your day because it was clean. When you are ready to remember, you will remember it as nourishment, not as noise." On their way out, Ron paused at the base of a goal and looked up through the ring at the pale blue. A gull stitched a neat path across the sky. He grinned.
"I don't need the score," he said to the air.
"But if someone got a biscuit afterward, I hope it was the keeper." Hermione laughed, and the laugh rose in the cold and hung there like a lantern. Harry added, "If the biscuit was shortbread, I'll assume it was a draw." The stands, if such a thing can be said, approved. Back in the common room, evening put its soft hands on the backs of chairs. The fire regained its amber. Students settled into their night shapes. The fat lady hummed something that might once have been a lullaby. Ron looked at his friends and found the word that fit the day. Enough. He reached for a quill, not to write an investigation, but to jot a line he wanted to keep. He wrote, "Some matches the castle keeps so we can grow enough to wear them properly." He set the quill down and warmed his hands over the fire.
A bit of pitch scent lingered in his mind like a story you're allowed to reread.
He didn't try to hold it tighter. He let it glow. Across from him, Hermione drew her knees up and rested her cheek there, the way she did when the day's good weight pleased her. Harry yawned and stretched and closed his eyes, the map a neat square under his palm, quiet as a sleeping bird. The clock on the mantel chimed a small, companionable hour. Outside, the snow rearranged itself on ledges with the care of a house elf, making rooms ready for sleep. Inside, the three friends leaned into the peace that follows a truth revealed gently enough to be received. Nothing dramatic had occurred. No curse broken, no villain unmasked. And yet the second twist had turned the story as surely as a hand turns a page. The match wasn't missing at all. It had been curated, kept, like a good coat in a cedar wardrobe, until the wearers could wear it with grace. Ron smiled at that, eyes half closed. Tomorrow would come, and perhaps another kind of remembering with it. For tonight, the castle had given them a room full of held breath and laughter, of soft catches and shared light.
A second heartbeat, a conserved day, a kindness, and that in Hogwarts is the kind of magic that lasts. The next day arrived with a pale sun that looked kindly but did not hurry anyone along.
Snow along the parapets had settled into smooth scallops, and the owls flew lower than usual, as if they too preferred the warmer pockets of air tucked close to the stone. Breakfast in the great hall felt uncommonly soft, voices at a lower register, steam curling from teacups in calm spirals. The enchanted ceiling an eggshell blue brushed with feathery clouds. Ron, Harry, and Hermione ate without a plan. It was a deliberate choice. The second twist had shown them a conservatory of moments, a quiet room that borrowed qualities from days and returned them polished with gentleness. Plans would have felt like shouting, so they let the morning shape itself. "Today we listen," Hermione said, spooning honey into her tea.
Not just to the castle, to anything that seems unusually attentive, like you, Ron said, smiling. Like you when there's treacle tart, Harry added. They grinned, and the grin seemed to please the hall.
The candles brightened a fraction, as if approving of unforced cheer. Between breakfast and first period, they took the corridor that passes beneath the great clock, its face wide and pleasant, its hands untroubled by haste. Ron had walked beneath it 100 times, never noticing the carving at its base. A small ring of leaves, and within it, a whistle carved from the same oak, the kind a referee might raise to their lips. The wood gleamed with the polish of many fingertips, yet the whistle itself was pure ornament, solid, not hollow. "Look," Hermione murmured, kneeling to trace the leaves without touching. A narrow thread of ruby dust had settled in the carving's creases, faint as blush.
Someone leaned here recently.
Watching time without counting it, McGonagall? Harry guessed. Or Filch, Ron said, then reconsidered. No, Filch wouldn't leave a tidy crescent like that. He leaves tidy nothing. They listened. Not for a message, only for the feeling of being listened to in return. The clock ticked on, companionable. Ron felt the same evenness he'd felt on the pitch when he'd pressed his palm to the earth. You don't have to look hard, the feeling suggested. Just don't look away. They parted for lessons, regrouping at midday with the unhurried gravity of people keeping a promise. Hermione led them to the library's side aisle, where the school keeps its bound years of the Hogwarts Herald and a scattering of thinner pamphlets printed by student clubs. Madame Pince nodded them through as if they were returning books rather than collecting peace. Dust motes hung in the light like slow snow. Hermione slid a thin volume from the shelf. On Games and Grace, a pamphlet so old the staples had softened to bronze. It wasn't about rules. It was about temperament. Gentle essays with titles like When to Cheer with Your Whole Chest and How to Let a Good Loss Mend You. The author's name had worn away, but a page at the back held a stamp. Property of the Steward of Games. Harry tipped his head. We've never met a steward. Maybe we have, Hermione said, but not by title. Ron turned the stamp beneath his thumb as if warming it might coax a memory loose. Does a steward choose which days to tuck into cupboards? Hermione smiled.
I don't think anyone chooses alone. I think the castle accepts a suggestion when the suggestion is kind. They left the pamphlet where it was and walked the long way out.
As they passed the arched window that faces the Black Lake, a rowboat ghosted across the water. No rower, no oars, just a neat progress along a sheltered current. Like a thought that knows where it's going, Harry said. The day did not present clues so much as permissions. Near the charms corridor, the suit of armor that usually clanked a greeting lifted its visor in a slow, well-oiled arc and then paused, perfectly balanced, waiting.
Ron found himself mirroring it with a small bow.
The armor's gauntlet tapped its breastplate twice, respect returned, and resumed its stillness with evident satisfaction. After lunch they climbed to the owlery. The air there always smells of straw and weather and the crispness of written paper. Owls rustled gently on their perches, blinking their round, intelligent eyes. Hermione stood at the center and closed her eyes. If there's a steward, she said softly. They'll need a way to speak without summoning a crowd. An old, tawny owl, ruffled, dignified, stepped from a shadowed beam to a nearer one, as if drawn by a memory. It did not carry a letter. It carried a thin length of scarlet twine tied off at one end with a tiny brass bead. The bead was stamped with a leaf ring. The owl let it fall at Hermione's feet, with the grace of a librarian setting down a book. Ron crouched. The bead was warm from feathers. "Leaf ring," he whispered.
"Like the clock, may I?"
Hermione asked the bird. The owl made a small, approving sound that was almost a purr. Hermione lifted the twine. The bead swung lightly and then steadied, pointing, not like a compass, not to north or south, but to down. Down through floors and corridors. Like a finger indicating a page already turned that wants rereading. "The trophy room," Harry said. "Or the corridor beside it," Hermione answered, feeling the weightless pull. "Where the sun leans in around 3 o'clock. They followed the bead's suggestion, rather than marching. Nothing hurried them. A moving staircase paused mid-swing as if deciding to be helpful, and took them 2 landings farther than necessary to spare their knees. A portrait of a long-ago beater gave them a genial wink. "Fine weather for remembering," he said, then lost his thread and smiled at them anyway. By the time they reached the corridor outside the trophy room, the bead had settled into a quiet stillness, pointing toward the strip of wall between 2 tall windows. The stone there looked like any other, mottled with age, faintly warm from the day. Hermione touched the wall with 3 fingertips and asked it the simplest kind of question. The wall answered by being a door, not in the way of shifting and grinding stone, not dramatically. It simply decided to be a doorway for a while, as if it remembered it had once been one, and opened into a long, narrow gallery with light falling in as if it had been waiting all afternoon to do just that.
No dust lay on the floor.
The room smelled faintly of linseed oil, beeswax, and the tender iron scent of old trophies. Along the far wall hung portraits not of people, but of scenes, paintings that moved the way memory moves, gently without insisting on the eye. Children carrying chairs up rows, a frog of a St. Mungo's volunteer waving a tray of biscuits, an umbrella lifted by 3 hands against the same slant of rain. At the end, a single portrait bore a figure, a witch in a plain wool cloak, hair plaited and pinned, whistle at her neck on a ribbon of no particular house color. She wasn't young or old. She had that age some people keep when they spend their years watching with warmth. Her plaque read simply, "Steward." Ron felt the gallery ease the moment they entered, like a room relieved to see a friend. Hermione stepped forward and cleared her throat in the small, respectful way you might do in a chapel, so as not to startle anyone. "Good afternoon," she said. The steward turned her head. Her eyes were the kind that welcome and weigh at once. "Good afternoon," she returned. Her voice sounded like snow accepted by bows. "You came at a good speed." "We were guided," Hermione said. "Showing the bead by a bird," Ron added, inexplicably pleased by the fact. "Most guidance is feathered at the edges," the steward said, which made perfect sense in the gallery. Harry inclined his head. "We don't want names."
"Only understanding." "Then you'll take the right amount," the steward said, and her mouth shaped what might have been the beginning of a smile. They waited. The portraits along the wall breathed softly, a stir of rain here, a shift of sunlight there. The steward laid her palm against her own painted frame, as though she were greeting the gallery just as carefully as it had greeted them. "There was a match," she said, with the steadiness of someone telling a bedtime story already beloved. "Perfect weather." Good nerves at first, then settled hands. A tidy block of a quaffle that would have wanted to be dramatic if not for a keeper who refused to be. Ron felt heat rise to his ears. The steward's eyes twinkled in a way that didn't tease. "A draw," she continued, "the kind that teaches 2 houses together how to like one another more than they did before." Harry's mouth curved.
Hermione exhaled, as if a knot had discovered it could loosen. "How do you—" Ron began, then caught himself. "No, better question."
Why did the castle keep it?
"To let it ripen," the steward said simply. "Some joys are green when they happen, loud at the edges. If you let them sit, their sweetness travels to the middle where it can do some good." Hermione glanced at the bead. "The hourglass," she murmured. "The conservatory," the steward nodded. "The castle keeps cupboards for people."
Why not for days?
She touched the whistle lightly. "When a moment has learned to be generous, it returns. And if it never learns?" Harry asked, not guarded, just thorough. "Then it becomes compost," the steward said, not unkindly. "Even sharpness can feed the next roots." They stood with that for a while. The gallery held them well. Outside, a shallow drift of snow slid from a slate ledge and let go with the faint sound of a blanket being shaken. Inside, a portrait of students passing cups along a row leaned into a bit more light. "We felt it," Ron said, thinking of the underwater quality at the window, the soft thock he'd known in his hands without seeing them. "We didn't need the score." "The score remained," the steward said, but it dropped its habit of strutting. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw stood together at the end because it felt like the correct punctuation. Her eyes warmed. "The castle likes correct punctuation." Hermione's laugh was almost silent. "So do I," the steward inclined her head. "Yes, and that is why the conservatory permitted you entry. You didn't rattle the jars." Harry's gaze moved along the painted scenes. "Is this the only gallery?" "No," the steward said. "But it is the one you needed. Is there something we should do?" Ron asked. "To return the day properly?" "You already have," she said. "You walked softly while it came back to you. You didn't tell it what it meant. You let it tell you." Ron felt as if someone had placed a hand between his shoulder blades, steadying, not pushing. "Thank you," he said, and meant the words in more directions than one. The steward inclined her head once more, and the bead at the end of the scarlet twine warmed against Hermione's palm, as if saying, "We're finished here." They turned to go. As they reached the threshold, the steward spoke again, her voice like a line drawn neatly beneath a paragraph. "Tomorrow's match is truly tomorrow," she said. "The one on your notice board will be the one you play. Let it be less clever and more kind." Harry, Hermione, and Ron nodded together. The gallery breathed its little sigh of contentment. The stone decided to be a wall again, and they were back in the bright corridor where afternoon sun pressed warm hands to the window glass. They didn't speak until they reached the landing where the view takes in the pitch and a slice of lake. The oval of grass wore its winter sheen. The rings stood like moons that had forgotten to be silver. "Less clever, more kind?" Harry said. Hermione's eyes were bright. "That might be enough to change everything," Ron chuckled, rubbing his palms not to warm them, but because they enjoyed remembering. "If it's a draw, I'll call it a miracle of manners," they wandered on. Near the fat lady's portrait, a first year tried to balance 3 books and a biscuit, and looked on the verge of losing both. Ron relieved him of the biscuit with a flourish that made the boy laugh, and the book settled safely in his grip. "Return the kindness," Ron said, giving the biscuit back. "I will," the boy promised, eyes wider than his face. Evening slipped its soft shawl over the towers. In the common room, the fire hummed like a contented cat. Hermione sat on the rug and wrote 3 lines, then blotted them and tucked the paper into the back of On Games and Grace the next time they passed the library. We remembered by waiting. Thank you for keeping our day until we could hold it properly. Upstairs, Harry laid the Marauder's map on his trunk and tapped it just to watch the castle breathe. The pitch was a blank oval again, no ring, no crowd-shaped echo. Satisfied, he folded the parchment as tenderly as you cover a sleeping bird. Ron stood a long time at the dormitory window. He did not try to conjure the saved match. He didn't need to. The steadiness in his chest, the feeling that had been following him since the conservatory, kept time easily with the winter night. His student ran laughing across the courtyard below, the sound carried gently by the cold. Somewhere, the steward's portrait finished its day of watching and let the gallery dim to the restful color of beeswax. When Ron finally lay down, he did something he rarely did. He thanked the day before it ended. The thanks did not try to pin the day to a page. It simply let the day know it had been well met, and Hogwarts, which hears such things even when they are barely a thought, hummed once in the stone. A low,
fond note that said yes, carry on like this.
And tomorrow's match will come home on its own. Morning settled over Hogwarts like a friendly shawl, draped lightly across towers and turrets. The first patch of sun found the Gryffindor table and warmed the teapots until their lids clicked softly, like polite greetings. Ron, Hermione, and Harry took their seats without hurry, happier to let the day arrive than to seize it. The steward's words lingered between them, not as orders, but as a melody they could hum, less clever, more kind. Hermione poured tea and set the pot on a folded napkin, so it wouldn't scuff the wood. What we choose today should feel simple, she said, voice low and sure.
Nothing showy.
Nothing to prove. Harry nodded, glancing at the enchanted ceiling. The pale sweep of morning washed with the faintest brush of cloud.
Choices that help the match come home to us without being pulled, he agreed. Ron tore a roll and buttered it with careful generosity, an action so un-Ron-like that Hermione smiled. All right, he said, brightening.
First choice, we practice, but very quietly. No shouting plays, no clever tricks meant to catch anyone out.
Just rhythm. Rhythm is kind, Hermione said warmly.
It lets everyone feel where they belong. They began with small measures. After breakfast, Ron sent word to the team to meet. No whistles, no drills. Just a few brooms, a few passes, the sort of practice where hands remember their good manners. When the players gathered, Ron kept his voice even and his instructions few. Let's think of the keeper as a basket, he said, surprising himself with the gentleness of the metaphor. Not a wall. The idea is to hold safely, then return kindly. The chasers blinked and then smiled as if relieved that they didn't need to crash their way through stone to be considered brave. They set to it. Throws were tidy, returns were soft. Now and then Hermione's voice floated from the sideline where she kept notes, not as a critic, but as a gardener. That turn was considerate, or you left space there, everyone breathed better. Her words never buzzed, they hummed. Harry, watching with a seeker's long practice at noticing what others miss, chose a pattern that would cost nothing and give much. He called both teams' chasers into a small huddle and taught them a shared signal for when a collision threatened. 2 fingers tapped to the heart, then pointed outward.
I see you.
You first. It took 5 tries before it felt natural. On the 6th, 2 flyers made the gesture at once, laughed in the wind, and adjusted in the same graceful loop. The sky, which loves cooperation, seemed to soften. By midday, tiny kindnesses had begun to network across the school, as if the castle itself passed them along. Dean Thomas replaced a wobbly benchboard in the stands without being asked, humming while he worked. Lavender and Parvati folded scarves into a neat pile at the stairmouth where the wind usually stole them. Neville, carrying a tray of seedlings for Professor Sprout, stopped to tie a loose rappet around a first year's ear-flap hat.
No one announced anything.
It all happened at the tone the day had set. Hermione made a different kind of choice, one that looked like nothing and accomplished a great deal. She visited the library with a slip of parchment and quietly copied a short passage from On Games and Grace. Then she returned the book to the shelf with the slip tucked inside, not as a secret but as a found kindness. Cheer what you want to grow. Let silence be the soil for courage. Madame Pince noticed and did not object. She straightened the book with unusual tenderness.
As if to say she would guard the slip with the rest. Lunch?
The talk at the Gryffindor table ran light. Predictions without gloating, hopes without attachment. Luna drifted by and left 3 butterbeer corks arranged in a triangle.
For balance, she said dreamily.
Ron pocketed one and felt, to his surprise, steadier. Hufflepuffs near the doors waved cheerfully.
Ravenclaws, glancing up from their soup, returned small nods that meant we see you. We are seen.
After lunch came the choice that would decide the tone more than any tactic. Ron went to find the Ravenclaw captain, a rangy chaser with bright, thoughtful eyes named Orla. He didn't rehearse. He simply found her in the corridor outside the Charms classroom, where the sun made neat rectangles on the floor and spoke as if he were asking the day to continue kindly. Orla, hi. I thought about the match, he began, her mouth tilted. If it's about those feints you've been practicing, we'd rather not, she teased, but gently. Ron shook his head. No feints?
In fact, fewer tricks in general. I was thinking,
what if we agreed to a quieter code?
Nothing that takes away competition.
Just an agreement that the crowd doesn't turn fierce and that we don't either. Signals for safety. Space for a laugh when two of us try the same pass and tangle it. Orla studied his face with the exact attention of someone checking the wind before a high throw. To make the day easier to keep, she said, as if finishing a sentence. Exactly, Ron said, relieved she understood without the tediousness of explaining. So it can come home to us afterwards like a good song. Orla considered another moment. Then she offered her hand. Yes, she said, let this be an honest match and a friendly one. They shook, no fanfare, only clarity. Harry, who had lingered nearby, added the shared safety signal with a brief demonstration. Orla approved it at once.
Beautiful, she said.
That's a useful vocabulary. Hermione, waiting by the window, watched them with a look that was all pride and no possessiveness. When the two captains parted, she held out 3 apples and a smile, to remind your bodies that they are welcomed to this day. Afternoon thinned into gold. On the pitch, Ron supervised one last piece of quiet preparation, stewarding the stands. He asked a few fourth years to lay out woven blankets along the lower rows, for elbows and knees that might fidget into discomfort, as Hermione phrased it. Nearby, a pair of Ravenclaw prefects, unprompted, chalked small arrows at the stair ends to ease the flow of feet. The castle appreciated such choreography. The stairward looked almost content to be helpful. There was one choice Ron kept for himself. He carried his keeper's gloves to the Conservatory of Moments. The little room breathed its beeswax hush when he stepped inside. He set the gloves on the brass-rimmed pedestal and stood back, breathing evenly. I'm not asking for edge, he said to the room.
Just for steadiness.
And for the right kind of remembering. The globe-labeled gloves that remember the softness of a catch brightened and dimmed once, like a cat opening and closing its eyes. Ron smiled.
Thank you, he whispered, and left the gloves there for a single hour, long enough to be listened to, not long enough to be fussed with.
When he returned, the leather felt no different under his fingers, yet his shoulders loosened half an inch all the same, as if the gloves had agreed to take only their fair share of the day's story. Hermione's choice was an invitation. She scribbled a small, neat card and pinned it to the notice board by the entrance to the stands where the empty rectangle had once sat. If you find yourself cheering loudly, try smiling first. Sometimes the quiet sound carries farther. She didn't sign it. The words didn't belong to a person. They belonged to the tone. Harry's choice required no parchment. He decided he would search for joy that wasn't about the snitch, the tidy pass, the graceful abort, the shared glance after a near collision resolved with laughter. When he spotted such moments, he promised to notice them with the sincerity reserved for true skill, even if they belong to the other team. The snitch will come when it's ready, he told Ron, and Ron felt, inexplicably, that the snitch had heard and approved. As the sun drew a thin ribbon along the rim of the lake, the school began its slow migration to the pitch. The air tasted like wool and clove, the way mufflers and warm pockets do. The first years tumbled down the stairs and settled, as if learning how to sit on benches were a subject taught at Hogwarts. The portraits along the perimeter frames leaned in their gilded chairs and beamed. The suits of armor chose to be still, lending their iron calm to the edges of the day. Then, one more choice, the smallest and perhaps the best. Ron, on his walk to the locker room, passed the clock beneath which they had found that carved whistle. He paused, placed his palm gently to the oak, and said without embarrassment, "We'll do our part." He didn't ask the clock for help. He simply acknowledged its attendance. The clock, which has watched many things ripen and many things soften, ticked in a way that sounded like carry on. At the team doors, Ron turned to find Hermione standing a little way off with 2 steaming cups. She handed him one. "For your hands," she said, "chamomile and honey." He inhaled the steam and felt the edge and the center of himself shake hands. "Thanks," he said. "For the whole
tone, it's ours," she corrected gently.
You set it too." Harry joined them, tugging his gloves with the unshowy precision of someone who has learned to wear calm. "Signal check?" he asked. They all tapped 2 fingers to the heart, then outward.
"I see you."
"You first." 3 small movements, a whole vocabulary. It felt like knowing how to say please and thank you in a place you love. They parted then, Harry toward the sky, Hermione toward the stands with her quiet bundle of blankets for stray knees, Ron toward the dressing room where the brooms hung in their orderly row. He paused before his and ran a hand along the handle, not to wake it, but to let it know he was glad for its company. "Less clever," he said softly, echoing the steward.
"And more kind." The broom felt steadier under his palm. By the time the team stepped onto the grass,
the light had mellowed into that hour when the world blushes and then holds its breath. No horns blared, no speeches rang out. The pitch itself seemed to stand a fraction taller, as if pleased to host a day that knew how to treat it gently. Up in the gallery of scenes, the painted steward no doubt folded her hands and watched with the same tempered tenderness she always had. Choices had been made, so small they looked like nothing at all, and yet the air wore them, and the stands learned them, and the match, whenever it began, would be able to return to its place in the castle's heart without scraping its knees. The next morning dawned silver and still. Snow dusted the pitch like powdered sugar, soft and even, and the sky stretched pale as parchment. The castle breathed quietly, as though holding a note before release. Today was the day, the long-awaited match that had first gone missing, then found its gentler rhythm again. But it wasn't about the score anymore. Everyone felt that, even if no one said it aloud. Ron woke before the others. He sat on the edge of his bed, the faint light painting soft lines across the dormitory walls. His keeper gloves lay beside him, patient and ready. When he slipped them on, they didn't feel like armor anymore. They felt like memory, flexible, familiar, kind. He took a long breath and whispered, "Let's make this one a day worth keeping." Down in the great hall, the air hummed with quiet excitement. It wasn't the sharp buzz of competition, but something steadier, a calm anticipation that comes when everyone agrees deep down that today will matter for gentler reasons. The students talked in lower tones, voices full of warmth instead of rivalry. Even the enchanted ceiling seemed to approve. Light drifted through the clouds like the slow bloom of honey in tea. Hermione joined Ron and Harry near the entrance. She had a knit scarf around her neck, its ends gently frayed from years of use. "You both look different," she said with a teasing smile. "How's that?" Harry asked. "Calmer," she replied. "Like you've already won something, even before the match starts," Ron smiled. "Maybe we have." As the teams took to the pitch, the castle itself seemed to shift closer. The walls leaned in, the towers listening. From the stands, cheers rose softly, warm, not wild. Professor McGonagall stood with her arms folded, eyes glinting with quiet pride, while Flitwick balanced on a stool, clapping his small hands with delight. The air shimmered faintly, as if the magic of the school itself wanted to witness this new kind of Quidditch. The whistle blew, a clean, clear sound that carried no sharpness. Brooms rose, steady and smooth, gliding rather than leaping into the cold morning air. The quaffle passed between hands like a polite conversation, quick but never cruel. There were still points, still plays, but something softer guided the rhythm. It was the steward's words in motion, less clever, more kind. Ron hovered before the hoops, his breath steady, his eyes following the game with calm attention. The gloves on his hands seemed to remember for him when to move, when to trust, when to let go. A Ravenclaw chaser approached fast, streaking through the air with grace and focus. Ron caught her eyes for half a heartbeat, and in that small, shared glance, they both understood. This wasn't about stopping her. It was about completing the story together. She threw. He reached. The quaffle curved, brushing his glove, and slipped through the lower hoop with a satisfying thump. The crowd cheered, not wildly but joyfully.
Ron grinned. "Nice shot," he called.
The chaser laughed mid-air, flushed and wind-bitten, and waved. Harry circled high above, eyes keen but easy. The snitch glimmered far off, not teasing this time, only waiting. He didn't chase right away. Instead, he watched the players below, their laughter, their rhythm, the pattern of teamwork unfolding, like a dance learned in kindness. Hermione from the stands smiled faintly, her quill forgotten. She felt something stir in the air, a quiet enchantment that didn't come from spells, but from harmony itself. Then a curious thing began to happen. The light over the pitch shifted, not darker or brighter, just clearer. It was as though time wanted to slow down, to admire what it saw. The steward's voice, soft and far away, seemed to thread through the air like wind through a chime. When a day forgets its sharpness, it learns how to last. Ron felt it before he saw it. The faint pulse through his broom handle, the deep warmth in the gloves. The air thickened with something golden, visible only at the edges of sight. Then he realized the castle was remembering. The missing match, the forgotten day. It had begun to weave itself back into now. 2 days, separated by mystery, were softly overlapping. For a heartbeat, 2 Ron Weasleys stood at the goalposts, the past one mid-save, the present one mid-smile. 2 Harrys hovered high above, both steady, both certain. 2 Hermiones in the stands leaned forward with identical expressions of quiet pride. Then the light folded, layering one moment upon another until they became one. The crowd gasped softly, not in fear, but in awe. For a moment, they saw it too, a glimmering afterimage of that other day, the one no one had remembered playing. They saw students standing in the same spots, cheering, laughing, waving scarves, echoes of themselves made from memory and light. And when the 2 visions merged, when the present fully accepted the past,
a warmth spread across the grounds, so gently that even the air seemed to sigh. Ron caught the next quaffle effortlessly.
The movement feeling both new and remembered. He tossed it back with practiced grace, and the Ravenclaw seeker, eyes wide with wonder, caught it with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. The stands erupted in applause, not for victory, but for beauty. Hermione rose from her seat, her heart full and still. She whispered to no one in particular. This is how Hogwarts heals its days. High above, Harry saw the snitch flicker again, gold against gold, and this time he moved. Not with urgency, but with ease, his broom gliding like an ink stroke on parchment. The snitch didn't flee, it danced playful and light. When he caught it, the world didn't roar, it exhaled. The match ended not in triumph, but in peace. The whistle sounded one last time, softer than before. Players touched down, shaking hands, laughing, shoulders brushing like old friends. Ron found himself beside the Ravenclaw chaser again. She extended her glove.
That was something else, she said, smiling. He shook her hand, firm but kind.
Yeah, he agreed. Feels like we just helped Hogwarts remember itself. Harry descended, holding the snitch loosely between his fingers. Its wings fluttered once, then went still, glowing faintly as though grateful to rest. Matches aren't meant to be forgotten, he said quietly. But maybe this one needed to wait until we learned how to keep it properly. Hermione joined them on the field, her cheeks pink with the cold, and her eyes alight.
You did it, she said softly.
You brought the day back, and made it gentler than before. The steward's presence seemed to hum faintly in the air, invisible but felt.
Every kindness leaves a mark, her voice seemed to whisper.
Some marks are how magic remembers love. Snow began to fall again, thin flakes, delicate and slow. The crowd lingered long after the match ended, as though no one wanted to disturb the peace that had settled over the pitch. Even the banners hung still, their colours soft in the golden light. Ron looked up, smiling at the quiet world. I think, he said slowly, we just helped the castle finish its own story. Hermione nodded, eyes warm. And it's a story that will keep itself safe this time. Harry looked toward the towers, their windows glowing softly against the silver blue sky.
Maybe, he said, the magic was never lost.
It just needed us to play with the right kind of heart. And for the first time, Hogwarts felt completely still, not frozen, not waiting, but content. The missing match had returned, not as memory, but as something better. A lesson learned, a day made whole. In that quiet, perfect moment, Ron whispered to himself, less clever, more kind. And somewhere deep within the castle, the old steward smiled. Evening had begun its slow descent upon Hogwarts, painting the castle towers in shades of violet and gold. The match had ended hours ago, yet no one seemed eager to leave the field. The air itself felt sacred, touched by something beyond victory or loss, a hush that lingered like the last echo of a lullaby. The crowd drifted away in pairs and trios, voices low, laughter easy, boots pressing gentle marks into the thin snow. Ron, Harry, and Hermione remained by the stands, standing in the cool quiet. The sun had nearly slipped behind the forbidden forest, turning the lake into a mirror of fading light. The broomsticks rested against the wooden railing like tired companions, their handles gleaming faintly in the soft glow. It's strange, Ron said, his breath visible in the air.
I can't even remember the score, Hermione smiled faintly.
That's because it doesn't matter anymore. Hogwarts remembers something far better than a score now. Harry nodded, still holding the snitch. It fluttered once, then grew still, its tiny wings folding neatly. Feels like the castle is finally at peace, he said softly. Like the day we lost was only waiting for us to be ready to earn it. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the last traces of pink sink below the tree line. The gentle clink of the stand settling in the cold echoed faintly, almost like the castle's sigh of relief. Above them, lanterns began to bloom one by one, scattering warm, buttery light across the pitch. Hermione took a step forward, glancing back toward the school. I think the steward was right, she said.
Not all memories are meant to rush back.
Some are supposed to wait until we can carry them kindly. Ron tilted his head. Do you think she's still watching? Hermione's eyes softened.
Oh, I think she's always watching.
Maybe not just her. Maybe everyone who's ever cared enough to let the castle rest easy. Harry followed her gaze toward the faintly glowing windows of the distant tower. Dumbledore, he murmured.
Lupin, Fred. The names drifted between them like blessings rather than losses.
Maybe they all got to see this. The words settled gently over the group, and for a moment, even the winter air seemed to pause in reverence. Hermione tucked her scarf closer around her neck. her eyes bright in the fading light.
I suppose that's the real magic of Hogwarts, she said.
It remembers everything, but it only shows us what we're ready for, Ron chuckled softly.
Then it must have known I wasn't ready before today, Harry smiled.
No one was. That's why the day hid. We needed to learn how to play without pride getting in the way. They began walking slowly toward the castle. The grass whispered beneath their boots, and snowflakes, light as feathers, began to fall again. Behind them, the Quidditch hoops stood like quiet sentinels, their silver rims glowing under the moonlight. The banners on the stands fluttered lazily, content now that they had seen something worth cheering for. As they crossed the bridge toward the courtyard, the hum of Hogwarts magic deepened, a low, steady pulse that vibrated faintly through the stones. Ron turned, glancing back one last time. The pitch shimmered faintly as though wrapping itself in a soft curtain of gold before sleep. "Good night, then," he said, to no one in particular, but the air responded with a faint, approving whisper. Inside the castle, warmth awaited them. The great hall glowed with candles, and the scent of supper drifted from the kitchens: pumpkin stew, buttered bread, and mulled cider. Students sat together, tired and happy, their faces lit by the same quiet joy that had filled the day. Gryffindors and Ravenclaws shared tables, swapping stories and laughing softly, the kind of laughter that has no sharp edges. As they entered, the fat lady swung open with a proud smile. "Well done, my dears," she said. "Not just the game, everything." "Thank you," Hermione replied warmly, stepping inside. By the fire, Crookshanks dozed on the hearthrug, purring like a lullaby. Ron sank into an armchair, untying his scarf, his eyes half closed with the pleasant fatigue of contentment. "You know," he said slowly, "I think I'll remember this match for the rest of my life."
"Even if I never remember the score," Hermione smiled from the couch beside him.
"That's because it wasn't about winning, it was about being good." Harry, leaning against the mantel, looked at both of them and said quietly, "It's funny. We always think of magic as something that happens to us. But today, it happened because of us." The fire crackled softly in agreement. For a long time, they said nothing more. The sound of pages turning, the gentle sighs of sleepy portraits, the soft tapping of snow at the window, all folded into the room's peace. Outside, the night deepened, embracing Hogwarts in calm. The missing match was no longer missing. The day had returned home, whole and kind, and with it so had they. Night had fully arrived now, and Hogwarts rested under its star-strewn quilt of sky. The towers stood tall and quiet, their windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. The lake mirrored the constellations, its surface unbroken except for the occasional ripple from a curious fish. The castle's breath was slow, its warmth tucked safely into every corridor and common room. In the Gryffindor common room, the fire had burned low, reduced to a quiet cradle of embers. Ron, Harry, and Hermione sat close, each lost in their own calm reflections. The laughter from supper had faded. All that remained was peace. Hermione leaned her head against the arm of the sofa, a book closed softly in her lap. Ron stared into the flames, watching the last orange sparks swirl into shadow. Harry sat at the window, gazing out at the moonlight touching the forbidden forest. It was one of those rare nights when the world seemed content to be silent. No storms, no urgency, no unsolved riddles, only the comforting rhythm of breathing and the soft ticking of the castle clock. "You know," Hermione said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper, "I think today was what Hogwarts always meant to teach us."
Not spells or tactics or even courage?
But gentleness, the kind that stays, Ron smiled faintly, eyes still on the fire.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? After everything we've faced, the battles, the noise, it's the quiet days that stay with you the longest. Harry turned from the window, the faintest grin tugging at his mouth.
Because that's when Hogwarts feels most alive. when it doesn't need to be loud to remind you it loves you back. A comfortable silence followed. Outside, the snow thickened, wrapping the castle grounds in white softness. Somewhere deep in the walls, the steward's clock chimed, not forward, not backward, but steady and true. It was no longer a reminder of loss or mystery. It was simply the sound of time moving kindly again. Hermione closed her eyes and murmured, "Maybe that's what magic really is, learning how to live gently." Even when the world has been loud, the fire flickered once more,
as though nodding in agreement, and as the night deepened,
the castle seemed to hum a lullaby of its own, a quiet promise that all was well, that all had found its place, and that the story, for now, could finally rest. Hogwarts slept, and so did its heroes, safe, warm, and remembered.